Now we're at 3 o'clock. Thank you all for joining the ESA annual meeting. I am John Miller. I am the Director of Membership for ESA, and career content is sort of my baby when it comes to the society. I want us to have a lot of resources available for folks to pursue careers in ecology that cover really all the possibilities. So that's why we're organizing these sessions for this year's meeting, to try to invite in ecologists who have a few different kinds of careers to tell you a little bit about what their experiences are. I hope you've had a chance to view everybody's presentation so far. If not, you still can. The content will be there for quite a while. And even this live Q&A will be recorded and live for quite a while after the meeting actually ends. But with all that being said, I hope you have questions for our panelists. I don't want to go into like an extended introduction for everybody, but if the panelists, and you know who you are, want to just turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves so that you're ready to go to actually ask those questions, please do. And I'm going to open up the chat so I can see it, but otherwise, folks should feel free to get started. Does anybody have any questions in particular for any of our panelists?
Hi, I actually have a quick question for everyone. I was trying to find, I wasn't sure if, have you posted what you were sharing? Like when I clicked the link, I was hoping for, I don't know, PowerPoints or video or something, but then I only saw this. So I wasn't sure if your stories are individually posted or if it's just something we come back to later.
They are actually, Vanessa. If you go into the where the session's located in the Context platform and you click on each individual like person's link, their presentation is saved there.
Whoops. Where's my thing? Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure because I won't be able to stay for the entire time. So I wanted to make sure I saw everything. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I have a quick question for everyone. I haven't been able to view all the presentations yet because of connection issues with the website this morning. So my apologies if you did answer this in your presentation. But just for all your different career paths, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like what % of the time do you estimate you spend out in the field or doing hands-on work in the lab as opposed to computer work, writing, other things? Just kind of what's the computer to hands-on balance for you?
I guess I can start with that one. This is John Mull, and I'm in an academic position at a teaching institution. And for the most part, my field time is in the summer, except when I get out with students, you know, in classes, which I try to do as much as possible. But certainly, there's not a lot of time for field work for me, anyways, from September to April.
Does someone else want to share a little bit about their experience with that? Zakiya?
I can answer. I think for me, it's not what I expected. I'll start with that. But I would say about 75% of my time is indoor, doing data analysis, meeting with students. And I'm a professor at NC State. I'm an assistant professor. And maybe about 25% of that is getting out in the field with students and designing and setting up research projects.
I'm happy to chat to you. This is Laura Patesh. I work at NOAA in the Office for Coastal Management. So I have a policy position. I spend very little time in the field. I used to spend a lot of time in the field. But when I am in the field, I'm doing things like site visits of some of the programs that my office supports.
So we have a couple of questions. Let's see if she's on right now. If Veronica's had a chance to join in, I don't see her on here yet. Veronica, are you on? Okay, she may still be coming in from the other panel. Let's see. For Blake, coming from the consulting world, does a PhD put an ecologist at a disadvantage when applying for environmental consulting jobs?
That's a great question. And Veronica, I replied back to that on my page, but I can speak to that here with everyone on. So in my experience, I have seen those with a PhD be not at a disadvantage, but at a great advantage. So my field is consulting, environmental consulting and ecological work has been what I've worked for a private company for a while, and then I work for industry now. So yeah, what I've seen is those people that come in with a PhD, highly desirable because of the, if the PhD was field intensive, then those field experiences, those field skills translate perfectly well to my field. But then especially the writing skills. Those people who've gotten a PhD have proven themselves that they can write and they can independently work on a project. So it's highly desirable, but they could expect to be fast-tracked. You know, it's common to speak to the question about field versus office. Early on, heavy in the industry and consulting, heavy field work, but then later on, more office work. Someone with a PhD could definitely be fast-tracked and get to the office a little faster.
Thank you, Blake.
Thank you, Blake. This is an interesting question from Monica. I graduated with my PhD in March, just in time for the pandemic to really hit the US. Now I find I'm competing for jobs with colleagues who are much more experienced than I am. Any advice on how I can stand out in the NGO world? And actually, in addition to the NGO world, Chia-Yi, if you don't mind me asking about like the communication world too, because that's interesting to me as a person who does communication.
Yeah, sure. I worked at a nonprofit for about 3 years after my master's. I did a master's of conservation biology at Columbia. I think it's very similar to other areas where, like, if you know people, let them know that you're looking for opportunities, reach out to them. I'm not really great at cold calling, but I think that it's worth a try, just to say like, hey, I'm interested in getting into nonprofits. These are my skill sets. And a lot of places, like where I worked at EcoHealth Alliance, and a lot of the interns that we got them that way. We didn't advertise internships. So that's something to keep in mind. Like a lot of smaller organizations, they may not advertise internships because they may already get enough inquiries from people who are interested. So I think that's something to look into. And I think a lot of places now would be open to remote internships. So it's not going to be limited to what your region, what organizations are based in your region. And as for science communication, I think that's something, if you're interested in it, just start exploring opportunities right now. Like anytime you have a thought, or you want to rant about something, or you had a conversation with a colleague that you think would be useful for a wider audience, like write it out, put it on a blog, or like start tweeting it. Like any kind of science communication like that, I think is good practice for if you want to move into that field.
That's awesome. Thank you. Does anybody else want to take a full shot? Like I know Laura, you probably had some, can you speak to that experience a little bit?
Yeah, I work in government as opposed to NGOs, but I think that I empathize with your situation. I really feel for a lot of folks who are finishing up their degrees right when this is all happening. I do think that going ahead and setting up, reaching out to organizations that you'd be interested in working with, we're all kind of thinking differently about how we work these days. And so there may be kind of new opportunities to engage, as the previous speaker said, especially given that basically the vast majority of what we're doing is virtual right now. So folks might be more open and more creative than normal about what they might, want to see. I think you can always do informational interviews where you reach out to people whose work you find interesting and just see if they'd be willing to grab a online coffee with you sometime, and just talk about their careers and your interests and see if they might have connections for you to explore. Most people are friendly and approachable, and happy to spend some time talking to current or recent students.
That's awesome. Thank you. And now I actually want to, this is the question I was hoping someone would come out right out with. And this is, I'll just open this to all of our panelists, because we represent a broad swath of ecological careers, but Caitlin asked it in the chat, and I think now is a good time. In such a broad field, how do you narrow down what you want to do as a career? You know, with so many different pathways in front of you, how do you pick something?
Well, I'll take a stab at that one, although it's been a long time. It's been 20 some years since I've had to make that decision, but it's probably, there's not a lot of insight in this, but it's doing things, you know, getting out there and trying things and seeing what you like, being willing to take a postdoc maybe that's a lot different from what you did in graduate school, or just to try some different positions and see what sticks. But that can only do that for so long, of course, but there's really no better way than to actually do something either in the longer term with a postdoc, or doing something, a short-term experience, volunteer, or some kind of a term position.
And I was going to suggest, as the previous panelist, that shadowing opportunities. I think for me, I did a few RU type programs, and that kind of helped me realize what I really enjoyed and what I really didn't. And I always tell students, when you find out what you really don't enjoy, that's still really helpful. But I think if you aren't able to do the RU opportunities, taking the opportunity, as someone else suggested, and grabbing a coffee and learning about what people actually do in their position, or seeing if there's an opportunity to actually shadow them.
Yeah, those are good, folks. Thank you. This question is actually for Blake. It has a follow-up, incidental follow-up, but as a graduating senior, Catherine is looking into the job market and doesn't see many opportunities for individuals with a bachelor's and less than 5 years of experience. In consulting, should I still apply for the positions that are asking for more experience, like 5 years or a master's degree? And any advice for a new BS grad?
Yeah, great question. Great question. The job market right now may be a little slower. I'm just going to be honest, because honestly, a lot of the consulting world is dependent on things in the markets going upward, and so it may be a little slow right now, but there are those opportunities out there. What I would strongly encourage a person who's graduating is, sure, you could fire off some resumes, you could fire off some applications, but making a personal connection. If you've got someone that is who's a recent graduate that's in the field, reach out to them, talk to them. Your professors or teachers, they have contacts who are in the industry, who are in consulting. They can make that connection for you. Very valuable. So reach out to them and see what opportunities they have, what they know of. Having that relationship is really going to become very important. That's how I got my first job. Is I had a connection with the person who hired me. He had gone through the same school at LSU that I went to, and so that's those kinds of things are very valuable. So make that connection. But sure, if there is a job that you're very interested in, and it does list off several years experience more than you have, you could apply for that, and at least your name is in that person's mind, so that something comes up in the future, they think about you.
Thanks, Blake. And then there's a little bit of follow-up that's broader. Anybody can answer if they like to. From Elaine, asking if it's realistic to sustain a career in ecology without pursuing a master's degree. And if you look in the chat, you see Elaine's case. She's an older non-traditional student striving to enter the field, but finding it difficult to locate open opportunities, either to get that experience in the first place, or to get the kind of job that she's looking for. So what kind of advice would you maybe give to somebody coming from that later career transitional pathway?
John, that's a question for me?
It can be, or it can be a question for anybody. But you can definitely take a Blake.
Sure,
Yeah, go for it.
Just real briefly, and I'll give someone else an opportunity. Yeah, there are some opportunities. People who are a bit non-traditional to come into it can bring a lot of life lessons and life lessons learned into the field. So don't be afraid of that. Yeah, and just emphasize other opportunities that you have learned in life, not just the degree later in life.
Okay, thanks, Blake. Milton asked a question for Zakiya. See that you came in from the private sector into academia. I feel that I'm in a similar way since I worked for some years in ecological consulting, and then I started my degrees. My question is if that I could, would I be at a disadvantage looking for a role in academia, especially since I'm older than than my peers?
I think for me, I feel like it added value. Now, mind you, I went from industry to academia in a professor position, and I feel like as I taught classes, I think students valued that experience, being able to actually talk about real cases that had happened in the field. And as a faculty member, I would value having a student, graduate student, having experience from industry, because it gives you a different perspective. And I guess I'll say most of my research is applied. So I'm always interested in answering questions that are going to make a difference. As far when I say make a difference, have an impact on private landowners or farmers in the case of some of my industrial hemp work. So I am always interested in students that are looking for applied type research projects. And most people that have worked in industry, most of the work that we do in industry, if it's not affecting quote unquote the bottom line, then it doesn't necessarily get funded. So I would think it adds value, but maybe someone else from academia could give a different perspective.
I think it definitely adds value, and I don't have as much experience with colleagues who come out of the private sector or have transitioned in from some other sector, but I know what the few that I have had interactions with, it does add a dimension that is very different from what other faculty members can contribute. I mean, it's just a different perspective, and I think there's also a lot of evidence that the more diversity you have in perspectives, the better you have problems covered. So.
Thanks, folks. So there are a lot of questions, and I wanted to try to get to as many as I can. So I'm going to start kind of skipping through the thing a little bit. I don't want to feel anybody to feel like we're skipping you on purpose. I'm just trying to kind of cast a wide net. This one from Sarah says, a question for everyone. How much on-the-job learning did you experience when first beginning your career? And how much did you use your skills that you gained as a student?
I'm happy to take this one first, and others feel free to chime in. I've done a lot of on-the-job learning in government. We typically have portfolios that are very broad. So I may have been an ecologist studying physiological ecology of bivalves, but I was suddenly in an office working on global climate issues and policy solutions in the resilience space. And so 95% of my job was on the job learning, and I really enjoy that. So I've kind of, and then I've followed that. I continue to be interested in climate, coasts, and oceans, and I always have been. But in terms of the specific niche and the specific role I'm playing, that's going to kind of shimmy around depending on what's happening in the policy arena and what's happening in the agency where I work. Yeah.
Anybody else?
I think even with a teaching position, you can find yourself having to learn a lot of things on the fly, because I think it's gotten better, but you don't always get the preparation that you need to just start teaching when you enter a job. So just learning how to teach, basically, or learning a new subject that you didn't have expertise in before, at least not enough to teach it. You find yourself teaching a lot, teaching yourself a lot of new information.
Thanks, folks. And I'll say to our panelists, because I see Chia-Yi doing it in the chat, feel free to answer questions as you see them pop up too. I can help out a little bit. Sam asked a really good question that kind of goes for everybody, more or less. It seems like the further you advance in a sector, the more time you spend in the office. How can you continue to be largely doing hands-on work in the field, even late into your career?
I'll hop in. I think you have to force it. And I think the challenging part for me, I manage a lot of students, graduate students and undergraduate students. I do have colleagues that get a bit more time in the field, but I would still say it's not nearly 50-50. So I think it depends on your position. When I was working in industry, it was probably maybe 60% in the office, 40% in the field, because I was managing research sites throughout the South. So I think it just depends on the position. And if you're interested in having that larger component of hands-on being in the field, I would look for positions that fit that model.
Well, thanks, Zakiya. Is it frowned upon to take a break between your master's and your PhD?
I'm not in a position where I would, where I have PhD students, but I don't see any reason why that would be counted against you. And it might actually, it might actually end up being a strength depending on what you do between the time you finish your master's and you start your PhD.
Thanks, John. Hannah asked a question directly for Chia, so I want to come into that. Do you know how academic scientists with an interest in science communication can be involved in science journalism?
Sure, I was just going to type something, but I'll talk about it a little bit. I think scientists have a lot of knowledge, and that's where you can provide value to journalism. I think something that's become more common now is people who are in science, in medicine, writing opinion pieces for different newspapers. I think that's something that you can link into if you're interested in getting into science journalism. Find out if your local paper has a science section, or if you could potentially write a column, like a regular column about science, about your work, or about other, whatever you want to write about. See if that's a possibility. The website called The Conversation has become pretty big in recent months, where a lot of experts are writing about what they're learning, what they know about the pandemic, as well as other topics. And that's another way that you could get into journalism. Yeah, I guess like you don't feel afraid to like write to a paper or write to an editor and say like, I have these ideas I want to write about. I think it's important, and just pitch an idea of like what you want to write about. And I think that's a good way to start getting your foot in. And there's a lot of resources online about pitching, so check them out and see if that's something that you want to do.
Thank you. Sonia asked a question of everybody, thinking back on your own experience, what is a key thing to take into account when you're looking for a job or a graduate opportunity when right now you have a bachelor's degree? How do you position yourself?
I would say that in addition to your education per se, just developing as many skills as you can along the way, whether it's just during your bachelor's degree or in a graduate degree, things that can be such as being able to use R or other applications that are widely used. If you have that ability, say coming out of a bachelor's degree, you're probably farther ahead than a lot of the peers that you're competing with for a job. But skills are really important.
Yeah, and I'll say I'm not a scientist, nor do I pretend to be one. But as a person who is in a career field and pathway that had nothing to do with what you went to school for, that constant development of new skills is actually all that makes you very, very marketable. I recommend that to almost everybody. Learn new stuff, try new things, see if you can't flex out in some roles sometimes, because you might be surprised at where that can lead you. Even if it isn't what you ever wanted to do. If it were up to me, I'd be a history professor, but here I am. This is from Mauricio, and I'm asking this because I want to inflame the alumni of different schools in the room. Mauricio is asking, wants to go to get a master's degree in environmental science program that weighs aquatic over field or not field, terrestrial ecology. Is it better to attend school on the East Coast or the West Coast?
I'm not going to answer that question with a straight answer. When I was in grad school, I thought West is the best. I live on the East Coast now. It's all good. So I think it really depends on the lab and the type of work and how good of a fit it is for what you're interested in versus what coast you're living on. Both locations have lots of amazing universities. So I'd say focus more on the lab and on the department and the advisors and who your peers would be in the student group, as opposed to geography, unless you have a geographical need, which is totally fine. But anyway, I don't think there's a clear answer there.
That's fine.
And Laura, just to add to that, that's a great thought of, really focus in. If you're going for a master's or a PhD, your professor is going to be of paramount importance. So to make sure that you fit well with that person, and when you get out to interview with these professors for these positions, we've got to admit, we're in a great field where there are a lot of fellowships and a lot of stipends, a lot of ways you can get a graduate degree for nothing or get paid to do it. It's a phenomenal field to be in. So I always encourage people to do it. But yeah, make sure you fit with the person, the professor, and the project.
Thanks, Blake. And just in case anybody worries, my cat's about to jump onto my desk. So I'm gonna put my camera off for a second. But Travis asked a really good question. I think we're really close to the end. But he says he's finishing his third year as a PhD student and will be done with qualifications this week and expect to graduate next summer, basically. How should I be contacting research ecologists regarding postdoc positions? I think that's a really good question.
I guess I can take that one. Congratulations, by the way. I think I would suggest reaching out to them by email. And because time is so limited, I always tell students to give people a time frame and maybe just ask, can I have 20 to 30 minutes of your time to tell you a little bit about myself and learn a little bit about your lab. There are people that don't have time and may not respond. So I'll just say, don't let that discourage you, but that would be my suggestion. I don't know if anybody else has suggestions.
Yeah, and then we had kind of a follow-up on the question of postdocs from Asha, just asking like how to make the kind of connections that you need to find those opportunities.
I was just going to recommend some things I've already seen posted by the ESA about networking. Maybe one of those has already happened, but from what John says, those are still available. So I would, any information that the ESA has posted about those kinds of things for this meeting would be quite valuable.
Yeah, and just as we close here, thank you all, by the way, for joining and taking part. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time to do the presentations and then joining us for the live action today. There goes my cat. I can put my camera back on. I just wanted to remind everybody that we do have live networking sessions throughout the week, beginning at 4 o'clock today. And then in addition to that, if you look through that part of the program where it just gets into like the live stuff, you'll see that our sections and chapters have lots of events. So if you see something that pertains to a discipline that you're interested in, or a particular maybe career pathway that you're interested in, you can almost definitely find some people who are like-minded that you can try to connect with over the course of the week. You can drop in and out of the sessions. You're not signing up for anything for an hour. You can check it out. So I really recommend that everybody, surf a little bit, browse, see what's for you. We're at 3:30. I think I have to let you all go to the next thing, but thanks again, everyone. We really appreciate your taking the time. I'm going to drop because I do have something else I'm supposed to be paying attention to, but if you want to stay on and you want to chat for a second or use the chat room until Convex takes it away from you, I think maybe you can still use the space. Otherwise, thank you all again so much, and I hope I see much more of you over the course of the week.
Thank you, John.
I would like to ask the question to like the panelists that are here. Yet, do you guys think that the degrees that you have helped you acquire the jobs that you have now, or do you think it's just a bonus and like you really like the job that you're doing? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for the question. It's hard for me to trace a super linear path from what I went to school into what I'm doing now, but it does actually make sense if you unpack it a little bit. And I think that to me, it was more about kind of the way I was trained and how I learned to do science and how I learned to be a critical thinker and how I learned to communicate, and that those skills have followed me and have grown with me as I've gone from kind of a research career into more of a policy arena. So sometimes, rarely, my actual technical background is useful, but it's more the other skills that I developed through my academic training are what I use right now. But that's kind of just specific to my role in the policy arena.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'd like to ask the panel a question. So I wrote a question in the chat, but it got passed over. So I graduate with a master's degree in December. However, I am very anxious entering the job market during a pandemic when a lot of potential employers are not looking for new hires. What are some tips that you have for people like me?
Hey, Rebecca, this is Blake. Is there a specific job market that you're looking for within consulting or academic?
So the degree that I'm getting is going to be in plant ecology. I also have some experience with botany. My dream job would to be working for the Forest Service, and I'm just afraid that with everything going on in the world right now, that may not be possible.
I'll answer my 2 cents to this, and the rest of the team could chime in if they like. But my when I graduated, my my dream job was not this. My dream job was to work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or some kind of maybe USGS. Consulting can be a stepping stone to that. Those federal jobs are sometimes difficult to get and take some experience to get to and some connections sometimes. But you know, what I would say, and I've tried to close out my presentation in this way, a tip about job markets. When you come to a job interview, I like to say, don't come hungry. We're in a pandemic. I know economics are just about crashing, but I realize that you've got a great degree, a botany degree or botany experience. Those aren't skills that everybody have just on the street. And so recognize that you've got something you can bring to the table. You do have value. This company that you're being interviewed by, you know, don't come hungry in the sense of you're looking to take whatever job they offer. Interview them back, and that comes across when you speak with someone. You can tell when they are interviewing the company back, they know that they have some value. They are confident that they can get a job, and you will get a job for that degree. So that would be at least one thing I would offer.
Thank you so much.
And Rebecca, I would say, I don't know, you know, the Forest Service's situation specifically, but like we're still hiring the positions we were going to hire in my office. In some ways, federal government is relatively stable. It's not always that way, but right now we aren't really seeing any impacts on our hiring processes. That might change just due to broader economic issues in the country, right? But I wouldn't get turned away by the fear of anything because it may not be real. So it'd be better to ask. And if you need help getting in touch with someone at the Forest Service, actually there's something I'm doing tomorrow at 4 at ESA where there's going to be at least someone who's a Forest Service person that you might be interested in connecting with.
Yeah, I wanted to also add a little bit because I graduated from my master's in 2009, so that was during the recession, and then I was also job searching after my PhD, so I feel you in that anxiety, and it feels crushing at sometimes, but remember that, yeah, you have skills and eventually you will find something, but keep working on yourself and your skills and keep trying to improve your skill set, and yeah, just do what you can. You can't control everything, but do what you can to affect the things you can control.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop off, but if anybody wants to get in touch, just all my information is in my presentation, and I also have links out to different websites and things that you can check out in the presentation. It's a PDF and the links work, so check it out. Okay. Have a good day. Have a good conference.
Thank you so much. I have one question for any panelists still remaining. How do you feel like your experience helped you with applying for and getting jobs? So I graduated with my master's this past spring, so literally right in the middle of the pandemic, and I have not gotten a job yet, which is fine. I've been applying, and I'm not really even sure exactly what to apply to because I don't know exactly what I want to do with my degree, but I feel like my experience throughout graduate school wasn't very remarkable. I ended up having to do non-thesis after pursuing my thesis for 2.5 years due to complications with the data. So that was really anticlimactic. And then I didn't do any internships or any other work outside of the grant that I was on during graduate school. So I feel like on my resume, it almost looks like I didn't do anything for 3 years. And prior to that, I was kind of in customer service during and after my bachelor's in biology. So I feel like when I'm applying for any sort of position, whether it's like SciComm, you know, like I've toyed with the idea of doing like science communication writing, like the previous panelist who just left was talking about. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce her name. And I've also applied to like outreach type stuff. But yeah, I don't know where to go from there. And I feel like I don't really have enough experience, but even internships are super, super competitive. There's not even really a question at the end of that. I just ranted, but if you guys have any comments or responses, I'd appreciate it. Thank you for staying on.
Yeah, rants are totally understandable. It's very frustrating. You know, I don't know if this is gonna be popular advice for you, but I think it's important to take a step back and think a little bit about what really drives you and brings you passion, even if you don't know the answer. And again, reach out to folks who have careers that you find interesting, who can help you kind of talk through that narrative a little bit, because that will be super important for how you then sell yourself to organizations that you are pursuing. And it'll become clear to them that you really want to be there, right? That you're not applying to a bunch of different things. I mean, everyone is applying to a bunch of different things, right? But to them, you want them to be able to see you there and why you're coming there, right? So I think being able to weave that narrative and bring your experiences, even if on first look on a piece of paper, it might sound unrelated, but you can tell that story, you know? And if you can't, there are people who can help you tell that story, right? And that's okay too. So I think that's just kind of an important, because otherwise you're gonna spin your wheels, right? I mean, we've all spun our wheels many times in our job and soul searching processes, but it'll be more productive wheel spinning if you like know where you're driving, right? So I think just it's okay to just take a little bit of a step back before going like full bore into the application process, if you need that time to kind of regroup and reconnect and really think about the types of places that you want to be, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, yeah. And I heard you speak, I think it was you earlier, say that you got your degree in something really different than what you do now, or you work in the government now where you didn't before or whatever. And I think that's really interesting. I think that probably gives you that unique perspective. Kind of like piggybacking off of what you just said, you know, I want to give myself the space to think about exactly what I want to do. And I think I've been doing that like a ton.
Yeah.
But the conclusion that I've kind of come to lately is this sometimes overwhelming anxiety about, you know, how do I fund myself during that time? And I had planned to do a lot of that soul searching, you know, more than 6 months ago. And I had all these conferences planned to be able to connect with people and do those things. And most of them in the beginning got just canceled. They didn't get moved online. They just got canceled because they were just too soon after COVID hit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't really have that opportunity to connect with those community members and do even informational interviews, which is, you know, what I had planned on doing, to see exactly what their work was, so that it wasn't just the idea of something that I was infatuated with, but it was legitimately, you know, something I knew someone else was doing, and I would be able to pursue that.
Mm-hmm.
But the conclusion that I've come to recently is like there are probably a couple of different avenues that I would be happy with, but a lot of the jobs that I end up seeing are they don't compile all of the things that I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gets a little bit tough because I feel like my interests are so multifaceted that sometimes it's a little bit hard for me to explain, which is obviously just something I need to work on, you know, getting down my own understanding of what I like is necessary before I try to communicate that to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But I just haven't been really seeing like the positions that encompass everything I want to do. And maybe a question that I can actually ask from all of that for anybody as well as you, Laura, is, you know, did you feel like, especially in the beginning of your career, that the jobs that you ended up getting or applying for didn't meet all of the criteria that you really wanted to accomplish? And were you okay with that? Because maybe some of those other criteria were met later on with subsequent positions.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how your brain is wired. For me, I'll never be 100% satisfied with any of my situations. I love my job, don't get me wrong, but like I will never have a job that has every single thing that I love all packaged into it. So right now, I desperately miss mentoring students. It's not something that I do typically as part of my job. I do sometimes take summer interns, and so I'm like, oh, finally I have the ability to use that part of my brain and my heart again. I desperately miss being in the field. I love field work. That being said, I think if I was in an academic research position, there would be things about the job that I have right now that I would desperately miss. So I think that's okay, right? I mean, I think it's more about what keeps you satisfied in general. And for me, it's like working on issues that I care about with people that I really like and trust and think are smart and care about the same things I do, and think creatively about the world. So I've kind of just had to like throw that storyline out. And, you know, every now and then when I get my hands on a field site, I'm just like, oh, I'm so happy to be here in the intertidal again, or whatever that is, right? Mm-hmm. I find ways to bring that in through how I recreate or vacation with my family or whatever. And so, yeah, I think it's hard to do that. And for me, I mean, I was lucky because I got a fellowship, and that was the sort of leap of faith of taking me from an academic research situation into a government, and they just like throw you into the deep end. But if I didn't have that fast track, it would have been harder. So that was, you know, for me, that was how I made my entry and my transition, and that made it much easier than it would have otherwise. Blake, I don't know if you have perspectives too about kind of how you've handled that, or any thoughts for Nicole.
I can give a little of my own experience in that, yeah, professionally, same as life. For me, it's been a bit of a journey. You know, my first degree was in education, and I taught high school science for 2 years. It wasn't for me at the time, so I went back to school and ended up getting this ecology degree. Thought I would go into government work or NGO work, and kind of like you, when I graduated, I fired off a lot of applications, or at least I considered. I actually sent them all off to a lot of different places, had no connections to those people. I think probably two things. One, because I didn't have a connection and with whoever was actually the hiring person there. And then also maybe just kind of maybe what you were alluding to, Laura, is kind of, maybe it came across that I wasn't really focusing on one particular thing. It didn't come across as appealing to potential hiring managers. And so, you know, I landed a job in consulting. I thought this works for a lot of other reasons. I wanted to stay where I was for personal reasons. And, you know, 14 years later, I wouldn't have traded it for anything. I have really enjoyed my job. Like any job, it doesn't hit all of the different aspects that I like. Don't get to do a lot of research. That is, you know, this is kind of like real science. I don't get to do a lot of that. But pragmatic science, I get to apply a lot of things. And so there are positives, you know, for every negative, I think there's been a positive. So, you know, if something does come along where you see something that you would like to try it out. You know, if it lasts for a year or two, great. You've learned something, you can move on to the next position. That's my advice.
Pardon me, this is tech support. We only have this room for one more minute.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for staying on and focusing on chatting with me for a few minutes. I really appreciate it. I'd like to connect with both of you over whatever medias you have listed as well. I'll reach out to you via LinkedIn or email or whatever. But yeah, really appreciate that. Thanks so much. It looks like there's like a link that someone sent to the chat, which is so nice. Cool.
Sure thing. And thanks everybody for tuning in today. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I think probably our contact info is in our presentations. And yeah, thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.
Appreciate it.